This is Family Twist, a podcast about astonishing adoption stories and finding family via DNA magic. I'm Kendall.
And I'm Corey, and we've been inseparable partners in life since 03, 04, 05, also known as March 4th, 2005.
In January 2018, our found family journey took us 3,000 miles from the San Francisco Bay Area to New England, where we now live near my biological father, two half-siblings, and their families. We love being near them all, and the adventure continues.
Thank you for joining us again on Family Twist. We're very excited about today's guest, Shari Leid. Shari has a couple really remarkable adoption stories, and there's that DNA twist in there as well. Welcome, Shari.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm so excited to talk to you. I've been listening to your podcast, and so your voices sound so familiar to me.
We appreciate that.
Thank you. All right. So we'd already done introductions. So why don't we just launch in? Just the bits that we already know about your stories are so interesting. Tell us a little bit about your birth and your parents and childhood, that sort of thing.
Sure. So I was born in Seoul, South Korea. And if my records are correct, I was found in a parking lot in a box without any identifying information. So I did not have a birth family name with me, a birth date, or birth location, birthplace. So I just sort of appeared. And this is back in 1969, 1970. So quite some time ago, when international adoptions, they consider South Korea to be the first real wave of international adoptions following the Korean War, because there were so many Amerasian and Euro-Asian babies left there after the war. So even though I'm a few years after the Korean War, I'm still considered in that first wave of international adoptees. And of course, I was adopted into the United States. And like you, Kendall, I was adopted and raised as an only child. My parents who adopted me were of Japanese descent, both being born here in the United States, but also a generation older than my friends' parents. So they were the same age as my friends' grandparents. And they, as Japanese Americans, were interned during World War II, which happened on the West Coast for people of Japanese descent. I was a Korean adoptee raised by Japanese American parents that were a generation older and also, similar to you, Kendall, very religious.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up in a very conservative, Christian conservative family. That's kind of it in the beginning, the nutshell in the beginning, the framework of it all.
At what age did you find out you were adopted?
I always knew I was adopted. As far as it was just part of my birth story. There was a book that showed me coming off of the plane, two women from the agency that I was adopted through, which was Holt International. I believe they were the first large agency to start the international adoptions in Korea. And at the time, parents, not like today, where they travel a lot of times to the countries to pick up their children, most of us were delivered to the US. So my first pictures were me coming off of a plane with two older Caucasian white women. And so that's why I saw my baby book.
Right.
So I knew.
Wow.
How open were your parents to talking about their time in the camp?
Mm-hmm.
They were, my dad was a little bit older. He was born in 1922. So it really affected him all of his life. He was born in Seattle, on Main Street in Seattle. Neither parent had ever left the U.S. except for a few trips to Canada. So they had never been to any Asian country. And for my dad, he always tried to be this great, this good American citizen and to kind of prove he was American. So this really affected him. It was the only topic that when he started to talk about it, it made him emotional. And he used to say, I don't know where these emotions are coming from. He wasn't from the generation that was open to talk about therapy or things that, affected you in that way. So they talked about it, but it was not necessarily something that was super comfortable. And because of it, I grew up not really traveling the US because my dad didn't feel comfortable with our Asian faces. He didn't feel welcome everywhere.
Were they open to you discovering about your heritage, or what was the conversations like with Japanese parents and you coming from Korea?
Yeah, so they didn't realize that, especially back then, that there was such a dislike between the Japanese people and Koreans in general. And so when other Japanese Americans or Japanese from Japan would find out that they adopted a Korean child, the reaction was not always very positive. In fact, I remember as a child, most of their family was born here in the US, but there were some that were from Japan. And I remember as a child hiding because I was at a family gathering and there was discussion about how terrible Korean people were.
Oh,
Oh,
And I remember hiding. And this is back, like I said, in the 70s, where adoptive parents weren't given the tools that they have available to them now. And so although I knew about adoption, the way they dealt with it was it doesn't matter.
mm,
You're just like us. It doesn't matter. So they didn't really, you're basically, they would kind of say, you're basically Japanese. And I knew I wasn't. And it was a big deal for me to want to be uh, known as Korean, or at least as an adoptee. Um, and I did not meet another Korean person actually until I was in law school, so until my 20s.
whoa,
wow. Wow.
that is surprising.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. I know, in the Seattle area too, there's a lot of, especially now, there's a lot of Korean families, Korean businesses. But at the time, that was not my parents' group of people.
Mm-hmm.
And where I went to school, there weren't other Korean students there. And so I just never was a part of that community. And until law school, when I met my first Korean friend.
Wow.
Wow.
Which I can understand I've heard so many stories of the Japanese people who were born in the US who just wanted to assimilate and felt, of course, really insulted that they were being treated as outsiders when they were born here. It's shocking. And I can understand to a small degree how they would have felt like, yeah, of course you're just like we are. You belong here just like we do.
My husband and I actually adopted our daughter too. And our daughter, though, was adopted from China. So I have Japanese American parents. I'm adopted from Korea, and our daughter's adopted from China. um, but it's interesting because I learned a lot about my adoption through being an adopted parent, also to look at it from that angle. As an adopted person, for me, there was a big identity issue for me. And
Mm,
then when I look at my parents who had been interned during World War II, and when they came out internment, they my dad especially tried to raise me to actually kind of stay away from other Asian people because he
mm,
thought it would be safer for me if I wasn't in a group of Asian kids, and if I felt more comfortable, around kind of the general population. And so it's interesting for me when I think back to how this affected me growing up, my identity and confidence, because I had the layer of my parents having struggling with their own identity, and then I can come in and I'm struggling as an adoptee to figure out myself. So it's kind of layer upon layer.
Touching on the identity topic, as a child, I mean, you didn't have any information about where you came from, and it was a complete mystery. So, is that do you kind of shut that off as far as like thinking I'm never going to find out where I really came from, or did it make you more curious about who are my people?
It really used to bother me. I used to think, gosh, I must have in the back of my mind some memory of my birth mother's face, or the room I was in, or because I was a few months old before I was abandoned. And I used to just try to get that memory out. And I made up a story about my adoption when I was in kindergarten. And I told my
mm.
kindergarten class that I was a Korean princess, and I got in trouble. I got in trouble for that. My parents got called in. I was embarrassed. The principal got called in, and I never told that story again. Instead, I made up a probably worse birth story for myself based on the evidence I had of kind of like I ended up with hip dysplasia, being diagnosed in my 30s, and I found out one of the causes is a breech birth. I thought, okay, that's it. I must have been a breech birth because I can't tell direction. And of course, this makes sense. So I
Right,
started to make
right.
up this other birth story that probably wasn't the most healthy birth story. But I used to try to figure it out. And now I still want to know. I have my DNA in every DNA bank possible, including lost children's DNA bank in Seoul, South Korea.
Wow.
Well, that was one of the things that Kendall and I were talking about before we started speaking to you today. Was that are there other databases, specific to Korea? So there is one.
Yeah, it's fairly recent. They recently, and I say recent, probably within the last maybe 5 years or so, passed a law that allowed Korean orphans to submit their DNA to I believe it's through the police station in Korea. And so I did this during, you had to go through all these steps to do this because you had to verify that you were an orphan and you were an orphan person in Korea. And then you go to the Korean consulate in your area and submit the DNA. It was a very surreal experience for me. And surprisingly, it surprises me what becomes emotional. And I felt very emotional doing that. But also, I also have to tell you the truth. I don't feel very hopeful that that will lead to something.
Mm,
But it's interesting how these emotions come up for me where I don't necessarily expect or feel that I'm emotional necessarily about my adoption
mm-hmm,
experience.
mm-hmm,
Hmm. Why do you feel that you might not get anything out of that, or might not get any connections out of that?
Maybe that's a defense mechanism that I feel that, but I'm in 23andMe, Ancestry.com. I mean, all our big ones around here in the US, and nothing has been a close relation.
mm,
And and maybe that will come at some point because I think the Asian countries are starting to be okay with DNA testing. It hasn't been very popular or encouraged, is my understanding. But I've tried getting records, and you can't. I have no records over in Korea. I've
mm,
tried to see if I could find a investigator that could help me in Korean. It's difficult with the language barrier. Historically, from the time I was adopted, it was something that was not accepted. Single moms,
mm-hmm,
assuming if my mom was single or whatever the case was, there there's a good chance it was done in secrecy, my birth. So
mm-hmm.
I don't know. I'm not super hopeful. I joke with my husband. I joked with my husband. One person who matched with me but was too far of a match to be considered really a cousin reached out and wanted to meet me. I initially said yes, and then I looked at how far apart we were on the DNA, and I thought, oh, I don't want to open up this can of worms if we're this far apart. She was also an adoptee, and but then I kind of joked with my husband, well, how about if I need a body part at some point? I should have somebody. And he goes, how about if she's looking at you too because she needs
Yeah,
a body part?
Right.
yeah.
Yes.
Well,
But
I
yeah.
can I can relate to what you said because when if I didn't have these close matches with my half brother or my half sister that show up on Ancestry, when you start going further down, it almost creates a little angst because it's like there's some connection, but that connecting those dots is going to be so difficult,
Hmm.
especially like you alluded to. I was a secret, on my mother's side for sure. So even reaching out to the people that I have that are pretty close connections, that was just sufficiently awkward because it's like, you don't even know I exist, by the way, and I'm your like not very far away cousin, you know. It was
Yeah.
surreal,
Yeah,
but
and I've been blessed by being able to travel internationally quite a bit, and I haven't yet done that trip to Korea. And I don't
mm,
Hmm.
know what's stopping me, but something is stopping me, and I think at some point I used to feel like I don't know how to do it. And it felt like I needed to do something special or it had to be right. And I was afraid that I was going to get disappointed, I think. And even now to this day, I haven't done that trip yet. and
Hmm.
something is holding me back. And I think it is that fear of being disappointed, or that fear that I will go and I won't fit in.
What
Yeah.
if you were to get that ping all of a sudden that looks like it's a close relative and they're in Korea? Would that be the would that be enough to
Yeah.
get you on a plane?
That would be actually, that would be enough to get me on the plane after I did a deep dive through social media and
Yeah.
Right, make
Exactly.
sure it's
and
all legit.
yeah, and
Right.
did my little investigation work. But no, absolutely. I mean, I've even applied to be on. There was a TV show for a while. I don't know if it's still going on in Korea, where you go on and you say, "This is what I know about my birth. Is anyone out there to
Yeah.
connect with me?" And I've heard nightmare stories about that, where people in
Uh,
hotels with lines of birth mothers or families there waiting. So fortunately, probably I never got picked to be on that show because I didn't have enough information, because they do want to have a show that has a nice ending to
right.
it.
Right.
Right.
But yes, if there was that, I mean, when I listen to stories, like when I listen to your story, Kendall, or any of your stories on your podcast where people have found family, I start crying. And
Hmm.
again, I don't know where that emotion comes from, but I could listen to your story time and time again, which I have, and
Oh,
every time I get just as emotional about it. So there is something inside of me that really, really longs for that connection. So yes, I
yeah.
would jump on that plane.
Yeah.
Yes, there's that piece in your heart that's empty right now, and it
Hmm.
wants to be full.
We haven't talked about your relationship with your adoptive parents, but I know mine was so good that there's that it's that just it's the duality, right? It's like I
Hmm.
want to be respectful of them and their memories, but thankfully I also know that they were very open to the thought that I
Hmm.
could find someone, and they always encouraged me to do that. So I know every adoptee probably goes through some level of that, um, with the thought of finding biological family.
Yeah, I know my daughter, like I mentioned, my daughter is adopted from China, and I know that she would love, she has a similar situation as me. She has no identifying uh, birth name, birthplace, or birth date.
Wow.
And I see her struggling with it as well. It's nice that we could bond that way. Um, but it's also interesting watching her experience. And even though she's also Asian like me, so people may not automatically go, "Oh, you're adopted."
Right.
She does comfortably and tells people all the time that she's adopted. And it's interesting too. At some level, I realize the thing about adopted kids is, even when we're little, we're always explaining why we are in a family to adults. And I remember having these arguments with people as a little child, because my parents, people would assume they were my grandparents because they looked older, and they
Hmm.
were older and they looked older. And so I would always say, no, I'm Korean, and my name was Japanese, clearly Japanese. And I would have arguments with adult strangers that I was Korean and adopted, and explaining to adult strangers why I belonged in this family, or justifying why I belong.
Hmm.
And now looking back at it, and then when I've heard my daughter do the same thing, I think this is a lot for a little child to grow up with, having to justify why she's in a family.
Right. And what's going through your mind as that's happening, especially as a child, you start thinking, why is this a deal? Why is there
Hmm.
this assumed stigma that I don't
Hmm.
feel? You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
bizarre to me, and how disrespectful, to treat
Yeah.
any person like that.
Or people telling adoptive kids that they're lucky. You're so
Yeah.
lucky.
Yeah.
And you don't realize what psychologically that could be doing to a child, to think that you're in a family because you're lucky.
Right.
That's a lot on the confidence
No, it's
scale to
true.
kind of bring that down.
I remember hearing that when I was like probably like 4 or 5, and what the first thing that it made me think is like, well, what else could have happened to me? You know what I mean? Like, it's
Right.
like, I'm well adjusted and I love these people.
Hmm.
This it doesn't feel like luck. It felt like natural to me.
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting, especially now as adults, to look back on our experience as kids.
Yep.
Sherry, can we talk a little bit about you and your husband's decision to adopt?
Yeah, definitely, definitely. So it actually was his idea. It wasn't like a fertility issue for us. We had been married for a few years and we decided, um, we knew at the time because we adopted internationally it would take about 2 years at that time. We're like, okay, if we got pregnant, great. If we didn't, we're on this path. And so, as it turns out, we did not get pregnant. We actually the year that we adopted. My dad, who I was very close to, my adoptive father, died that year on my mom's birthday.
Oh,
And
Oh,
then a few weeks after that, we got notice that we had a child waiting for us in China. So there was all this stuff happening at once.
mm.
We go to China. We pick her up. I was working litigator at the time. I had a lot of time off. So I was taking this very long maternity leave because we were traveling. We come back. 2 weeks later, we find out I was pregnant. I am pregnant at this
Oh,
time. So I had to cut my maternity leave in half because I needed two maternity leaves in 1 year.
right.
Um, so we had our adopted child and our biological baby in the same year.
Wow. Wow.
and how old are your children today?
20 and 22.
Okay, okay.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So we made it through.
That's amazing. And it's funny, I haven't mentioned him before, but you just made me think of my previous supervisor in San Francisco. He and his wife went through something similar. They'd start making these plans for a European country. I can't remember which one it was, and they were planning for this adoption. And then I think as like right at the same time the wife of the couple found out she was pregnant,
Yeah.
and so they have these two children, and I think they're exactly the same age. I mean, they're like they're born
Yeah.
in the same year. So I just it's a crazy cool story that they are, nope, they're not twins. You know what I mean? Like they don't
Yeah.
look like twins to begin with, but then there's that constant description of,
Yeah,
uh
and honestly, having a biological child too, especially so close to having an adopted child, also taught me a lot about my own adoption. Watching that I have this baby who basically anytime he moved, made a noise, somebody was there to help him, somebody that
yeah,
was there to feed him. He never lacked for knowing who he is. He looks like my husband and I. He knows where he was born. He has his birth time down to the second. I mean, you
right.
know, this baby was brought in, born into a very secure environment. And I think about my daughter and I, both in similar situations where I always say if my records are correct because it's hard to know what the record keeping was back in Korea in
Mm,
1970 or what they may have changed. I have no idea. But if the
right.
records are correct, I had been in 4 different homes or orphanages before coming to the
Mm,
US. And I think about my son and how important that time was for him to become secure in who he was, even as an infant, that my daughter and I didn't have. And so by the time we came to our, for lack of better words, forever homes, uh, we had been disappointed quite a bit by people who
mhm,
are supposed to take care of us and passed around quite a bit. So
Right.
I just imagine how that has affected who we are
mhm,
or what
mhm.
we worked through. Not that other biological kids don't have those identity things also, because we all struggle in whatever way. We all have a story. Because I really did struggle with confidence, and when I think of now when I look back, a lot of my experience as a young person, I think personally that I can tie it back to not knowing who I was for so
Mm,
much of my life and
mhm,
having that not trust. At some point,
mhm,
I didn't realize that's what I was doing, but I didn't trust people.
mhm.
Now you mentioned that your father was very ill and about to pass when this was going on. Did your family have an opportunity to get to know your kids?
No, so my dad actually wasn't ill. He died suddenly of a
Oh,
heart attack.
Oh, okay.
okay.
And again, it was on my mom's birthday. So no, he didn't. My mom actually is still alive. She's 94.
Great.
So she did get to know them. But my dad, who would have been a great, great, wonderful grandfather, unfortunately missed the opportunity by just
Mm,
less than a year.
Oh.
wow.
Are there are there aunts and uncles and cousins? I know you were an only child, but is there more family out there that you've got to get to know better, and your children have gotten to know?
Um, well, my mom comes from a very large family. She's one of 10,
Oh, wow.
and my dad was one of four, but I'm not close to my extended family. My cousins were a lot older than me growing up,
Hmm.
and we didn't see them very often. And I don't feel that connection. I don't know if that's because of adoption or not. I'm curious because I wonder because I also don't feel the need to connect,
Mm-hmm.
and I feel a greater need to connect to a biological family member than I do to the family members that I was adopted into. And I don't know if that's just me personally and my relationship with them, or if it's a matter of biology.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a question about birthdays because
Mhm.
you didn't know your birth date, so I imagine your parents they chose one for you.
Well, the orphanage chose one for me. And my goodness, if you could choose a birthday, I just actually celebrated my birthday yesterday, which is in
Oh,
December,
Happy
the
birthday!
middle of
huh.
December. Why would they have me competing with Jesus? I mean,
Right,
I mean, that's a hard birthday to compete with,
Right.
right.
the Christmas and the holiday season. So they chose a birthday for me, and they gave me a very challenging birthday 9 days before Christmas.
Oh
Jeez.
boy, yikes.
I know one of our really good friends is a Christmas, he was born on Christmas, and you
Oh
just
wow.
yeah, it's just
So when the
empathy.
time came for your daughter, that had the orphanage also chosen a birthday for her?
Yes, they did,
Mm.
and they were much kinder. She is a late April birthday, which is the perfect time of year to have a
Perfect.
birthday.
No
Yeah,
People
kidding.
are still in
perfect.
school, weather's nice, your options are out there.
Yeah.
People aren't upset at you for having a birthday in the middle of a fun season.
Right. So I'm curious, has she taken any DNA tests?
She has, and
Oh.
she's also on 23andMe as well, and same as me. In fact, I think she has less connections, and
Mm.
maybe that's because China, there's less opportunity. And I think most of the people
Right.
who are even remotely connected to her are adoptees as well in the US.
Oh.
But my understanding actually is that in China, they're starting to do this with birth moms, have a DNA bank. And I don't know exactly how they're doing that,
Hmm.
but uh, yeah, she's very interested, and I could actually see because we share a family account. I could see her logging on, and
Mm.
she's been on this for quite some time, even when she was in high school, middle school, whenever this actually started with 23andMe. And so I know she's curious and
Yeah.
interested.
Do you have conversations about that, like what what her hopes are as far as finding connections?
Yeah, she would really love to find
Mm.
her family, and she's very different than my husband, myself, and my son. We are all kind of wired the same way. We are very school is meant for us. It's designed for us. We are test takers. We are check the box checklist. We are designed for the common education system. My daughter is creative. She
Mm.
does things differently than we do. She comes up with great ideas. She doesn't. She's more spontaneous. She doesn't like tests. She doesn't like math and science. She rather listen to poems. She rather sing. None of us can carry a tune. She can carry a tune, but that means she's the odd person out, right, in our family. So she'll ask questions. I wonder if my birth family did this. I wonder if my birth
Yeah.
family can carry a tune. you
Yeah.
know, um, and so she's looking for where are these traits because my son, people will say even oh, he's just like you, or he looks
Mm.
just like you, or he looks like a combination of you. Every little thing they can tie for him back to my husband or I, including his weird toe. That's my husband's. you know but my daughter, she'll that's when these things will come up. She has math dyscalculia. I wonder if my parents had math dyscalculia.
Hmm.
I mean, things like that, trying to figure out how she fits in and where all this stuff came from.
Yep.
What was it like for them growing up? One an adoptee and one a birth child, and growing up going to school at the same time.
Yeah, I'm really glad that they were two different genders. I think
Mm,
that helped because it
mhm,
helped from the comparison that people tend to do with siblings in general, especially so close in age. They we sent them to different schools starting middle school on because their education needs were different, and thankfully
mhm,
we were able to do that so they didn't get that comparison. Because my daughter does struggle with learning disabilities, and or I say learning disabilities, but honestly, what I learned, one of the things, she doesn't have um, what do you call it, dysgraphia or dyscalculia. She doesn't have that, but I learned that that's not a disability in China or
mm.
any of the character countries because they don't write that way the way we do. So when
Oh.
I say a learning disability, what I mean really with her is a disability, a learning style that doesn't work in the traditional school. So they grew up going to very separate schools, even though they were just a grade apart in age, and I think that
Mhm.
helped. They're very respectful of one another. They would not have necessarily been friends in school because they're so different. But right now, they're both in Los Angeles together, going to Disneyland with a group of friends. So they're very kind to one another.
Yep.
That's awesome.
That's
Hmm.
that's what you want, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's exciting too because I'm a Disney freak. So
I am too. I love
Yeah.
Disney.
I
When
know.
people tell me they don't love Disney, I just stare at them.
I
right,
know.
yeah, I
I
don't I
know.
don't get it. Yes, I carry my laptop in a Disney villain's backpack. Probably for designed for a child, but I don't care.
Yeah.
I get a
Yeah.
lot of compliments on
Yeah.
it.
And strange looks, but that's okay.
Right. Yes.
At least people are paying attention.
Yep.
Right. Yes.
Because it's kind of purple.
It is purple. Yeah.
So it's not the most discreet of
Right.
bags, but
So your story is still sort of open ended. It's kind of it's interesting. We'd be definitely curious to hear what happens. If you do end up with a connection, as things are starting to open up and other countries are starting to explore the idea of opening things up to birth mothers, getting on a registry. It's an
yeah.
exciting time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just think it'd be life changing. It's one of those things that for some reason, I feel like it's not going to happen, but there's a piece of me that feels like it could. Uh,
Yeah.
and even thinking about it makes me emotional.
Yep.
Yeah.
I
I'm
just can't imagine what that would be like.
I'm totally with you. I mean, I remember, Corey and I met uh, long ago, almost 18 years ago. And honestly, even at that point, I think I won't say I had given up, but I had just resigned myself, pretty successfully, I think, that it just wasn't going to happen, and this is obviously before DNA was really a factor in searches. And, but it talk about life changing, that instant
Yeah.
that I got
And
the
I
result.
hadn't, hadn't gone through what he had gone through as far as the years of like looking and dead ends and stuff. But the journalist in me was like pushing, like, well, how could you not? We got to keep looking. How could you, how could you want to stop? There's it's this big mystery out there, and
Yeah.
I just kept saying, I'm like, man, the chances of there being family out there are so
Yeah.
huge. I really feel
Right.
like your people are out there. We just have to find
Yeah,
them.
definitely. There have to be half siblings or something like that, I would
For
imagine.
sure.
So can I
Right.
ask you, Kendall, when you found out and you met your birth family or found out something about them, did you feel something inside? Like did that change the way you felt inside?
Yeah, and I think partly, and you can relate to this because of losing your dad, when you did. It's such a weird time in your own
Mhm.
family life. I think because my parents have been gone so long, I'd really gotten used to being, I don't want to say on my own. I definitely have
Mhm.
family members that I had remained connected to in my adoptive family and things, but there was an instant, just that, oh my gosh, I belong to somebody. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
um, biologically, like, oh my gosh, and to see, we should post, Uncle Sean would let us, we should post a photo of, I look like my birth father and
Mhm.
my birth mother, but I look strangely like my birth father's brother.
Oh, wow, wow.
Yeah, very much like Uncle Sean.
Like you
And
think you look like him when you look at him.
oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
It is because just to your point, and I think I've maybe mentioned this on a different episode. In my adoptive family, we look like the Benetton ad. That's what I always say because my dad was super. My adoptive father was partially, at least maybe an eighth. Native American, so
Mm.
super dark complexion, black hair. My mother was alabaster white, and with reddish hair. And I was this little kid in the middle that was just different complexion with blonde hair. And so, I, I knew I didn't look like they did.
Yeah.
And when people would claim to see similarities, we would all just laugh out loud and say, that's nice of you to say, but that's not real. And so, to find people that I really, favor, I mean, I feel like I look like a lot of my siblings.
Yeah, I think Kendall's even underplaying it a little bit. I mean, when you ask about was there a change inside,
Oh,
immediate.
Mm.
I,
I mean,
You
from
could
that
see it.
first,
You can also see it. You
oh
also
oh,
yes,
saw it.
from that first phone call with his brother, he had changed,
yeah, yeah.
Uh,
and then
yeah, that's what
it just
I.
it grew from there, and that's why we went on this crazy journey. I mean, I think if there hadn't been that instant like wow electricity connection, we probably wouldn't have moved. But I mean, it all happened so fast. Conversations on the phone turned into a trip a couple months later, and that turned into we're moving from California to New England
In two
in
months.
2 months, right?
So from the time we found my family in August, it was only until January that we had moved
And you didn't
across.
scare them by doing that?
Well, no, it's funny that you say that because my brother Chris, the one person I connected
Mhm.
with first, he was very happy, of course, because we were so happy to find each other. But he had a lot of anxiety about the fact he's like,
Yeah.
"You guys have nice lives out there. You have great jobs. You have a great home. You've got great friends." And he just didn't want to oversell uh,
Right.
the experience, although he was, like I said, very happy and it's been wonderful. But even this morning, I joked with him we were texting, and I said, because of the snow that Corey alluded to, I was like, "Can I remind you that I haven't whined enough lately about this horrible weather here?" And almost like, "And you
Yeah.
guys are worth it," but
Right.
it's
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're the only reason we're here.
yeah.
It's
I was really holding out for a not white Christmas,
yeah,
but I think
no kidding.
it has arrived.
Yeah.
Well, you know what I realized talking to you, and I mentioned that listening to your story and the stories that you share, it makes me emotional. As you talk about your story, I feel something inside, and I think it's healing. At least that's my view as an adoptee, to hear other adoptee stories when they find family.
Hmm.
And, even though it's not happening for me right now, when I hear your story, there's something inside of me when you say, I feel like I found I belong, or there's a feeling
Hmm.
that I belong to someone, I belong somewhere. For me, that feels very healing to hear you say that, because it reminds me that there is somebody out there and I do belong to somebody. I came from someplace.
Yeah.
So I think that's the wonderful miracle about your podcast and the stories you share, is there is also, in addition to them being very interesting, there I feel that there's really a healing well, at least for me as an adoptee, to listen to other adoptee stories.
That's exactly what we want to do. And I'm usually emotional anyway, and I'm making myself emotional right now. But you're right. To this day, when we step through the threshold at my brother's house,
Mm,
um, it's, I'm not mystic, but it
mm,
feels almost magical to me. It's like I'm at my brother's house. It took me
mhm.
47 years to discover this person. And
Yeah.
when he hugs me, and it just makes you feel like, wow, what was I missing all those years? You know,
Yeah, wow, that's
so
surreal. And I think that's maybe that my fear of going to Korea without having somebody there to meet me. is
Mm-hmm.
that that's the feeling that even stepping off the plane and being in my birth country, for some reason, I feel like I should feel like I belong, or that I should have this feeling. And I fear that if I don't have that connection already there, that I know somebody's going to meet me there, I
Mm-hmm.
might feel lost. And I think
I hear
that
you.
may be the biggest thing that's holding me back from taking that next step and actually at least visiting my birthplace or birth
Mm-hmm.
country.
But conversely, it might make you feel really, you know, partially at peace, like
Yes,
having
yes.
having
Hmm.
never been there. It's funny because I had been to Boston many, many times in my past, and never knowing that I had any connection to New England, because this is where I was conceived. So but stepping off the plane when Corey and I arrived in I'm sorry, October of 2017, it was a different feeling, to your point.
Was it?
I mean,
Yeah.
stepping, I was like, oh, like, never thinking that I had this weird connection to New England, um, that continues, of course, but it was a different, feeling. Like,
Hmm.
oh yeah, I was, I came from this place, it's like,
Isn't that
even though I
interesting?
had never lived here,
It's
but
interesting. That's the
yeah,
thing movies are made of.
yeah,
Right, absolutely, absolutely. And I think, sort of selfishly, it's been nice to be able to sort of create a community through this podcast, because it's, every story that we hear, we're just like, we're just sitting here in awe, and just like sometimes our jaws are hitting the hitting the table. And but we love our families, but we also love our chosen families. And
Mhm.
we just, this is an opportunity for us to sort of, connect with people who are going through the same thing.
yeah,
Yeah, well, I appreciate it. And your stories, they're all so different than one another. And they're interesting. And I've, I find myself going down the rabbit hole as I go through your podcast. If I start to listen to one, also I'm listening to, this man who's fostering all these children, and then this
Right.
woman who finds her birth family after 40 years or whatever it
yep,
was.
yep,
Us
Yeah.
two half siblings meeting up together again after years. I mean,
mm-hmm,
it's really fascinating, and the changes that happen in lives through adoption and through finding their birth connections. It's amazing.
mm-hmm.
Absolutely. It's I mean, it, talk about heartwarming, it's just
Oh,
like, wow. I mean, it's just, it's great. It's, we're it's a treat for us to be able to share stories like this.
mm-hmm.
Well, thank you.
And I want people to never lose hope, because if it took me 47 years, it can happen anytime. It can just happen. All it takes. My joke with Corey is, all it takes is one vial of saliva in a tube. It's like,
Right.
it's that simple. And that's not very glamorous, but hey, it's what it takes, right?
Well, I'm hoping, I just turned 53 yesterday. And so I'm hoping, and I actually hope when it happens, it's before I'm so old that it becomes a big news story.
Right, right, right.
95-year-old woman finally
Yep.
finds. So I'm hoping it happens if
Right.
it does happen a little bit before then.
Yeah.
It's funny you say that, because I just, I'm always looking, always searching online, for potential stories for the
Oh, yeah.
podcast,
Yeah.
and just stumbled upon a like a, not local to us, but just like a local news story about a man who was found on a doorstep, and he just turned 90, and it was his
Oh,
Christmas wish to find family. And he's got two brothers, and they've been able to talk, and it's just, wow. I mean, 90,
Yeah.
so
wow. That's amazing.
I
yeah.
know.
That's amazing.
Yeah. It's like, it's never too late, right?
It's
Right.
it's never too late.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Very good.
hopefully.
Yeah.
Well, Shari, definitely stay in touch with us, and keep us up to date as to what's happening with your story. And thank you so much for coming on and being so open about it. This has been wonderful.
Yeah.
Family Twist features original music from Cosmic Afterthoughts and is presented by Savoir Faire Marketing Communications.